The King of France made one fatal calculation. He thought killing a man would end the threat, but he didn't realize he had just created a monster. Imagine a fleet of ships painted the color of night, with sails dyed the color of blood, emerging from the fog. For 13 years, this sight struck terror into the heart of the French Navy, but they weren't running from a pirate king or an English admiral. They were running from a mother. This is the story of Jeanne de Clisson, the noblewoman who sold her castle, her jewels, and her entire life to buy a personal warship, all to hunt down the king who murdered her husband and prove that hell hath no fury like a widow with an axe. In 1343, Brittany was a dangerous place caught between England and France. But for Jeanne, life was a fairy tale. She wasn't born a warrior. She was a wealthy mother and a devoted wife, living in luxury. Her world revolved around her husband, Olivier de Clisson, a respected knight who controlled vast lands and held the trust of his people. They had everything: power, money, and a deep, unshakable bond. But in the midst of the 100 Years' War, loyalty was a fragile thing, and paranoia was running high in the French court. King Philip VI, fearing betrayal, invited Olivier and other lords to Paris under the guise of a celebration. It was meant to be a grand tournament, a gathering of friends and allies. Olivier rode out with his head held high, believing he was a guest of honor, completely unaware that he was riding straight into a trap that would shatter his family forever and turn his loving wife into the most feared woman on the seas. The tournament was a lie. As soon as Olivier arrived in Paris, the festivities vanished, replaced by chains and accusations. There was no trial, no jury, and no chance for defense. King Philip, driven by paranoia, declared Olivier a traitor and ordered his immediate execution. In a brutal display of power, Olivier was beheaded in the public square, but the king wasn't satisfied with just death. He wanted to send a message. He had Olivier's head transported all the way back to Brittany and displayed on a pike atop the city gates of Nantes. When Jeanne saw the severed head of the man she loved rotting in the sun, something inside her didn't break, it froze. She didn't weep or collapse in the street. Instead, she dragged her 2 young sons to the gate, forcing them to stare into the dead eyes of their father. She made them memorize the brutality of the French king and swear a blood oath of vengeance right there in the dirt. From that moment, the noblewoman died, and the lioness was born. She returned home not to grieve, but to liquidate. She sold her ancestral lands, pawned her expensive jewelry, and auctioned off the furniture in her castle. She took every single coin she raised, an entire lifetime of wealth, and walked down to the docks. She didn't buy a tombstone. She bought 3 massive warships. Jeanne named her flagship My Revenge, a literal promise to the world. She ordered the hulls of all 3 ships painted pitch black to make them invisible against the night sea, and she dyed the sails a deep blood red. This became known as the Black Fleet, and for the next 13 years, it was a ghost story that became terrifyingly real for French sailors. She didn't attack indiscriminately. She hunted. She scoured the English Channel specifically looking for ships flying the French flag or carrying King Philip's allies. When her fleet descended, they struck with overwhelming force, boarding vessels and overpowering the crews. But it was what happened after the battle that built her legend. Jeanne would personally walk the decks, identifying French noblemen. She didn't hold them for ransom like a normal pirate. She took a heavy axe and beheaded them herself, paying back the French aristocracy head for head for what they did to her husband. Yet, in the midst of this slaughter, she was calculated. She always left one single sailor alive on every captured ship. She would put the terrified survivor on a small boat and send him back to King Philip with a message. The lioness is still out there, and she is coming for you. King Philip VI spent his final years looking over his shoulder, but he never caught her. He died in 1350, knowing that the woman he wronged was still out there, haunting his waters. With her primary enemy dead, the fire of Jeanne's rage finally began to cool. After 13 years of relentless piracy, the Lioness of Brittany docked her Black Fleet for the last time. She didn't die in battle or at the end of a hangman's noose, as many expected. Instead, she found sanctuary in England, the enemy of her enemy. She married an English lieutenant and settled into a quiet life at Hennebont Castle. The woman who had beheaded nobles and terrified a kingdom passed away peacefully in her sleep in 1359. She left behind a legacy that proved some bonds of love are so strong that breaking them does not result in tears, but in a war that echoes through history.